Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Neil from Portal to Ascension, and thank you all so much for being here. If you did not check out the webinar right before this, we had Paula Harris, and we're going to chop that up, put it up on YouTube for you. So now the discussion that we're going to be having today, we're going to have Grant Cameron and Steve Bassett on with us today. And I don't see that Steve is in the room yet, so let me take a look, but I know Grant is. And the discussion today, oh, here you go. Yeah, Steve's in the room. Okay, so the discussion today is about the recent disclosure that's happening on a mass level through the mainstream media to really discuss and dissect what exactly is happening and the history behind this. So we're going to have a few people on, starting with Grant and Steve, and they're going to come on together. I'll be co-moderating, and we have a guest coming on to help co-moderate. Alan Steinfeld is with us. So Alan and I will be talking to Grant and Steve and getting their perspective on everything. And once that's over and we're done with that discussion, we have a couple other people that are going to be coming on. So without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and bring Grant and Steve on. Okay. Grant and Steve, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Awesome. Welcome, guys. Thank you for being here.
Yep. Let me start my video here.
Let me, okay, so you can go ahead and click start video.
Okay.
I'm not set up for video, so I'm going to go audio.
Audio is perfectly fine. So thank you all so much for being here, and thank you, Grant and Steve. I'm just going to go ahead and kind of turn it over to you, and what we'll do is we'll start off with Grant. And Grant, give us maybe your rundown of what's going on, what's happened in the last week up until present moment in as many minutes as you need, and then we'll go into Steve, and after that we can continue the discussion.
Okay. It was a big day last Saturday. I've always had the belief, whether I'm right or not, that there's people inside the government who were trying to leak this thing. I heard at least a year ago that this was going to happen, and exactly what I was told happened. I was told that high-level officials would make their identity public, and they would say this was for real. That's exactly what happened. What I'm hearing now from the same people is that this is just the beginning. This is what they called it, the prick in the bubble, that they are about to really start moving this thing. And I've just been watching the coverage from various news agencies and stuff. And what I've been able to determine, there's at least 24 videos that Elizondo stored away in unclassified locations before he left. Those videos are coming out, and according to George Knapp, there are 38 reports up to 490 pages each, and 36 technical reports. There's a pile of material. I'm working on the angle right now. I'm going to do an update in a couple days on the hardware aspect of it, because that's part of the story that everybody sort of missed. Was everybody picked up on the the nice little videos and what was going on there, but a lot of people sort of missed the fact that the claim is that they have a underground facility in Las Vegas where they're storing material. So I'm looking at that, and I've actually recovered some of the material. I've got some photographs of some of the material, which I just have to check, and then I will release as a potential for some of the material they're looking at. I won't identify the guy that that brought the material out. And I'm also looking at the other aspect, which I think is very important, because I'm a big consciousness guy. I believe that consciousness is the key to the whole phenomena. And so I'm also checking the story. Tom DeLonge has talked about it indirectly, and it's also mentioned in the New York Times story, and that is the fact that they've been working with experiencers, which to me is the most important aspect. And that's Kit Green, Hal Puthoff, and who's the other? Gary Nolan from Stanford University. And they're working on that, and I'm going to be doing some updates on what I know about that. So that's basically it. There's just piles of stuff happening. I'm hundreds of emails behind. There's another 28 interviews to listen to, and lots of people are talking now. And I think I basically say the blood's in the water. It's over. Disclosure is basically unraveling. It's just how long it's going to take. And from what I'm being told, it's days, it's not months, it's not years, it's days as they roll this thing out.
Excellent. And Steve, what's your opinion and your perspective on this?
I'm I'm a political activist, not a researcher, and so I view everything from both a political and a much bigger picture perspective. There's so many things happening in this field, so much history, that if you focus on one part of it, it's really hard to really get a sense of what's going on. So my comments are going to come from that larger picture. First and foremost, this is without question a major. It's clearly been in the works for some time. So I certainly agree with Grant on that. And Tom DeLonge right now is the quarterback on the field with the ball, as far as the disclosure process is concerned. But as it comes out, there's a couple things I think people need to keep in mind if they want to try to understand it, as opposed to just react to it. First of all, almost everything that comes from the military intelligence complex on this issue is a lie or not true. And lie is a little tough a word because it is national security based, and from their perspective, any lie or prevarication or misdirection in service to national security is excusable and acceptable, and I understand that. But when it comes to the Pentagon and the CIA, nothing is what it seems. So as I watch this unfold, there's so many things about it which are so clearly ridiculous and/or anomalous in a way that it's a little frustrating, and yet I understand it and I accept it. First of all, the media and a lot of people are treating this like this is the first time this has happened. It's not. We've been going around and round with these kinds of things turning up from time to time for 70 years. Secondly, the people that are involved are very high level, and it's not likely that any of them are going to get involved in something like this unless there's something really big at the end of it. The people that recently left the service of the Pentagon, like Elizondo or the CIA, when you have careers in those areas, when you leave, you have a huge list of options that you can pursue. A very lucrative contract, consulting, company deals, you name it. You can have a very good life. And yet they've chosen to sign up with a fledgling public service company, which is going to clearly raise some money, but it's not an easy road. Plus, it's tough. I mean, they're entering into very publicly the most controversial field in the world right now, and the field that's been under heavy embargo for 70 years. So there's that. And then when you look at some of the things that like Elizondo is talking about and Mellon and Justice, you realize that they're one thing they're not doing is they're not violating any non-disclosure agreements. They're simply not doing that. And that's notable. Also, the release of this footage, Elizondo brought the footage with him when he left the program that he, quote, resigned from. Fine. There is no chance, in my view, that he stole that footage. If he brought it, it was brought because the Pentagon allowed him to bring it, which means the Pentagon released it. And even though the Pentagon is denying that, they've already been approached several different directions. A number of spokespeople have come out. They're really hedging their bets, but I understand that. This is a release by the Pentagon. So it's the first time ever that the military has released gun camera footage. Another point, people are all excited about this gun camera footage and this particular event, particularly the Nimitz event, which they clearly consider to be a perfect incident to bring forward. The US government has got reams of gun camera footage. Does anyone think that that is like a rare thing that, wow, they set up a plane to intercept a bogey? They've been doing that for 70 years. I can't imagine how many cans full of gun camera footage they have. So one has been released, finally, 70 years after Roswell. but they have much more than that. Okay, fine. So this just gives you a sense of how kind of awkward this is. Also, you're listening to the various statements by these individuals who were inside and pretty well connected, people who had clearances, very high level clearances, and they're making careful statements, couch statements, avoiding the extraterrestrial statement, dancing around it. Fine. The government has had in its possession crash vehicles since the 40s and early 50s. They had bodies from Roswell. Roswell was a real event, right? And so this idea that they're doing research because they want to assess the threat implications of this phenomena, they've been assessing the threat implications for 70 years, and there really hasn't been any serious indication of threat against the United States. But they have to cast it under the threat name, because that's the way you do it. I mean, that's the safe way, right? They're not studying extraterrestrial intelligence. They're just checking out the national security threat implications. All of this is dancing around the issue. All of this is intended to sort of keep us in a certain place because, and this is the final point I'll make, we've known for some time, and I know Grant knows this as well, that yes, there are a substantial number of people inside the military intelligence complex that think this information should have been out long ago. But there's also a substantial number that think this should be classified forever. And so there's been a tug of war going on. And as time has gone by, those that want to maintain the truth embargo indefinitely are slowly losing their leverage. And so we're seeing this tug of war play out, and it sort of looks like it's finally swinging over toward the, quote, disclosure-minded members. But they still have huge public relations issues and complications, the political implications of what they're doing, because remember, they are not the boss. The president's the boss. So they're operating in a very kind of gray area, but they're being very careful. And so that's the larger picture and perspective on what's happening right now. It's not new, and yet it is new. But without question, it has a level of substance that may, in fact, bring the truth embargo to an end soon. And everyone is getting excited that 2018 is very well the year.
Right. Makes sense. So, Grant, what's your comments on that? But specifically,
okay, yeah, I've got some follow up to Steve. There is this power fight going on, and a lot of people have identified that. It's the same with the remote viewing program. There was a lot of people who believed this was demonic. And John Alexander, I think, just did an interview today or yesterday where he talks about this sort of idea that as long as you're under the radar, you can run a program like this. But once you get big enough where people in the defense industry know that you're running this program, as he said, you get swatted down, that you have these massive, powerful people inside the CIA, inside the defense industry, who have vested interests and or have very strong religious beliefs that we're not going down this road. You can sort of get into parapsychology and talk to your dead grandmother, but once you start talking gray aliens, a lot of people have a problem, and that's what happened with the remote viewing program as well, as these people that believe this is demonic. So there's this sort of struggle that I think people have to realize going in there. And one of the comments that I got as this thing broke on Saturday was a comment from one of DeLong's people that said this, and I quoted, I haven't got the exact quote here today, but on one of my updates I quoted, and he said, there's a shitstorm going on in Washington. People are trying to figure out how the hell did they get this out. So that's the way I look at it, is this was carefully planned. You can even take a look at the fact that 3 newspapers, the Washington Post, the New York Times, and Politico all go the same day with major stories. This was carefully coordinated. And Tom DeLong basically pointed this out the day of the news conference. He put something on his Facebook that said, every word that was written here has been planned for months. So even though Elizondo had only been retired for 1 day, then came on there, his speech was already written for him. This was all planned beforehand. Tom DeLong talked about dealing with Elizondo long before he retired. He was called Mr. L. He was never allowed to use the guy's name. And so this was carefully planned. So the way I think it would work is that you have a bunch of people in the government, and I know some of these people that are running this thing, and they're not bad people. That's where I want to, you know, people think that there's these bad guys who are trying to sort of cover up, and there are people who don't want it out, but there are people who want this thing out. And what it appears is that they all got together and they forced this thing out without the other side knowing what they were doing. And that's where they had this thing like, how the hell did they get this thing out? They managed to evade everybody. Nobody knew it was coming, and the people that were against it had no chance to stop it. So they dropped this thing, 3 newspapers all going the same day with this very powerful thing showing this very carefully orchestrated thing, which, as I said, I'd heard long before. This is what they were, what was, there was people planning. What I would say that no matter what people think about what has happened, there's no doubt to me that this subject is a lot less controversial now than it was last Saturday. I mean, this has really moved the consciousness. We have major media, and there's not so many snickers. There's vested interest people, like there's the SETI people. Seth has stepped forward to try to attack it. Sky and Telescope has stepped forward. But these are people who are, if this is confirmed, are basically out of business. I mean, it's like almost like the Bigelow interview. Bigelow said, why would you look out there when it's right under your nose? And significantly, this may be part of the setup that Bigelow went on camera last May to basically say, yeah, this is for real. And he's using the word ET, which I found very, very interesting, that he said, yes, ET. He's not talking about, you know, how they're couching it. They're saying, well, it could be this, could be that. We don't know what it is. And this sort of thing that Steve was talking about is, it's sort of very politically correct speech. Bigelow comes out and says, yes, this is ET, and this, they're here, and you don't have to look very far. And so you see this fight back from the sort of like the sort of the materialistic paradigm, from the classic military industrial complex who has a vested interest in, you know, ordinary weapons and stuff like that. But the other point I wanted to make was that Tom DeLonge, and I've said this all along as this thing unfolded, Tom DeLonge is really no longer really a part, to me, of this story. He is the guy that built the platform that these guys operated through. But with the story I was told, and this goes back at least a year, that said major people would identify themselves and they would put it out. So this last story with Tom DeLonge on Saturday had really nothing to do with Tom DeLonge. It had to do with Elizondo. It had to do with a carefully orchestrated plan by people to put a high-level official out there to say this is for real. And DeLonge really didn't play a part of it. And because DeLonge has this sort of a crazy background thing, what they wanted was this story that the New York Times would bite. So you couldn't use DeLonge, so you use these high-level officials, and they have definitely moved the consciousness up. We have actually filed an FOIA, and I just discovered today we filed it with the wrong agency. And I think Steve mentioned the fact that the DOA, the defense intelligence, or the defense people are claiming this wasn't them. And we just learned today it was the Defense Intelligence Agency that put the contract out. So we're filing an FOIA, and we're going to try to get these documents. The problem with it is, and this was brought up in an interview that Bob Bigelow did with Knapp in 2013, he said if business puts money into this, then it's proprietary information. So now you have a situation where you can't get it really with an FOIA. Bigelow basically owns this material. It's almost like the Contact movie. This guy, you know, with lots of money in the background, has played it very well and has basically got it control. And they say they're going to release it. We'll see what happens. But basically, Bigelow owns everything now, and very well played in my regard as to what happened. We are filing FOIA. We're trying to find out, especially with the film. How do you get the film out? Now I just learned today that he had put these films in unclassified areas so that he could get them when he left, because you can't take the film with him. When you resign in disgust from the Department of Defense, they normally don't give you a UFO film to go with you. So the UFO film is a strong indicator that this has been planned, that they wanted the film out. You needed the film. That would be classified type material. The same as they're supposedly going to bring this material forward, and some of the details to that. This is all going to be stuff, or you got Steve Justice is going to bring some plans from Lockheed Skunk Works. You usually don't get to have the plans from Lockheed Skunk Works and give them to the public once you walk out of Lockheed Skunk Works. So this shows that this is carefully planned, And basically what I was being told, that they're going to move this stuff out. So you have to get it from the black world. So you have the technology in the black world, and this is a way that they move it into the white world, and it has worked. I mean, nobody has panicked. Nobody's jumped off a bridge. I mean, they basically, a lot of people are saying, holy shit, this thing's for real. And nobody died. They just basically said, as Steve pointed out, this may have military applications. We got to figure out what this is. This is a, this may be a threat. And that's purposely how they spun the thing out, because the money is all in the defense. If you want money, if you want congressional look at this thing, you have to have some way to get the attention of senators, and national security will get their attention. Plus, that's where all the money is.
So, Grant, I have a question for you. First, I want to congratulate Steve and Grant for really dedicating a lifetime to making this happen, to putting pressure, I think, in a way on government organizations and creating this grassroots movement to make the disclosure as it is in this form come forward. And it's been a dedicated effort on both of you in a really beautiful way. And I want to just commend you on that. As far as the material, no one is saying where this material came from that Bigelow has, and how does something that's governmentally owned be given to a private organization like Bigelow's aerospace industry anyway? But first of all, where did it come from? Nobody is talking about the debris, and what else did they find at the debris? So that's my question.
Okay, I could take that question first. I mean, basically, as I said, the way they got the film out was Elizondo, before he left. Like, the cover story is, he was disgusted, and you got to remember that Mattis, his boss, the defense guy, the Secretary of Defense, saved his life in Afghanistan, physically saved his life. So he's very close friends with the Secretary of Defense. And so the story is that he puts out this, he's getting in a disgust that Mattis may not even have read his resignation letter when he left. He just left. But this was all planned. This is what I'm saying. They planned this very carefully. And that's what people are forgetting, is they think that Tom DeLonge set this whole thing up. And I keep saying 100 times, it's not Tom DeLonge. It's Bill Moore all over again. It's Tom DeLonge goes to a barbecue at Lockheed Skunk Works, and they let him talk to the president, and then they send him to CIA. They send him to NASA. NASA sends him to Ames. Ames sends him to these generals, and they put this team together. They realize he can be used to get this message out.
But where did they get the debris, the metal debris from the UFOs? I mean, no one's talking about the actual crash sites or where and what else.
Well, one of the pieces one of the stuff I'm going to talk about is sort of becoming public. It was a site in New Mexico, and they went there. There's some people that have been involved. They're sort of talking about it. I've got photographs of the material and the site, and Tom DeLonge is talking about 1948. So they, through the program, they gathered in this 10-year period, they gathered all the debris stuff that they could get. So this NASA guy was putting material in, and he discovered this site in New Mexico, and he's a metallurgic expert guy. And so that's where some of it came from. Now, where the other stuff is coming from, whether they got it from, Wright-Patterson, or I'm not really sure, but the fact that they've got a building would indicate that they gathered all this material. Like, Bigelow did a lot of work. I mean, he went after the Carpenter files, he got the MUFON files, he was going after the Canadian government files, he went after Colin Andrews' crop circle files. I mean, he was busy gathering material, and I would assume that he was gathering metal debris as well. I just know this one particular group of metals that this is part of what they're talking about, and I've got photographs of it. So I will put that out, and that came from New Mexico. And Tom DeLonge is talking about this layered piece that has up to 80 layers or something. He's talking about they're going to bring out this piece. So they've gotten that, and the same thing. It's like the same thing with, where do they get the material from Lockheed Skunk Works? Where does Justice come out with these plans where they're going to do this experiment to show the UFO propulsion? This is classified material out of Lockheed Skunk Works. They've managed to find a way to get this thing out of the black world, whether it's the films, whether it's the material from Lockheed Skunk Works, or the plans, or the metal. They've figured a way to get this in the public world. But again, it's controlled by Bob Bigelow. He controls this material because he would consider proprietary information. He did the work, and his company owns this stuff.
But someone asked a question here, and I'll get to Steve in a second. Do you think Bigelow should be requested to testify in front of Congress? You know, a Senate requested about all this. I mean, shouldn't there be a big congressional investigation about what's being released now?
Reid has called for one. Reid has called for a congressional investigation. I don't think Bigelow would have any problem going in front of a congressional investigation. That's what I'm saying. I don't believe these are bad guys. I believe these are guys who are working in their own vested interest. For example, Jim Semivan, who I say is the guy who runs the Tom DeLonge operation, is an experiencer. He had 3 beings in his room in the early 1990s. The guy that provided the material, the metal material that I'm going to talk about in a couple of days, is an experiencer as well. He told me his story. He told me exactly what happened in his story. He's a big-time NASA guy, and he's providing some of this metal material. So, you know, where do you go with that?
Well, that would be exciting if Henry Reid, of course, he's not in Congress anymore, but we'll see. We'll get back to that. I want to ask Steve a question because this is sort of the day you've been waiting for, the moment you've been waiting for, Steve. How would you go about making disclosure happen? If you were the guy pulling the strings and you wanted not to freak out the public all at once, would you do it this way? Release footage from Air Force radar and then slowly break the fact that there are also aliens involved? I mean, I'm just curious about your plan for
disclosure comes from the government. And so the government is going to do it in such a way that is appropriate to their concerns. That's a given. Not the way we want it. My job as an activist is to get disclosure. By the way, disclosure I'm talking about is the announcement. And that only comes from the head of state. It doesn't come from the Pentagon. What happened this last 10 days is more small d disclosure, but very powerful small d disclosure, without question. So let me give you a timeline on this, which may help a little your listeners to understand kind of what may be happening here. Bigelow is a key player. His interest goes way back. He started the National Institute of Discovery Sciences in '95, 3 years before he even started his aerospace company. And of course, NIDS investigated the subject, investigated the Skinwalker Ranch, and did a lot of other things. He put a lot of money into it. And he supported other efforts. And then NIDS wraps up around 2004 or 5. So he's already got 7, 8 years now, and it's well known that he's doing this. He's when he signs up as a contractor with NASA, obviously they're aware of what he's doing. But nevertheless, everything is fine. He's moving forward. He wraps up NIDS and then gets involved in MUFON for a while. Tried to get a joint venture going there. He was funding it. That didn't work out. That stops, and then he enters in 2007. With this program that Harry Reid wanted, right, which ended up becoming not really what we'll call fully classified, but essentially secret. A few people knew about it. They didn't make a big deal out of it. I don't think it was never a formal special access program, though they wanted it to be, but they kept it relatively under wraps because it wasn't much money. So he gets involved in that, and he does that for 5 years. So now he has deeper and deeper into this issue, and he's well known in the, I'm sure, within the military intelligence complex. But he's an outside contractor. He's not an inside Pentagon man. He's not a CIA man. He's on the outside, but he has a lot of money. So that program goes on to 2012. A couple of years go by, and then the Pentagon makes a decision, which is why we hope to learn much more about, to reach out to Tom DeLonge. Now, why they chose Tom, only they know. But Tom has a long history in the subject, going way back into the 90s, early 90s, even the late 80s. He's clearly got funds so he can maneuver, and he's well known. He can reach the young people, and he's kind of a comfortable, how would you say, intermediary. So they reach out to him, we believe sometimes in 2015. Grant alluded to this. He's invited to this. He's invited to that. And before he knows it, he's up to his ears in this. Are they using him? Well, yeah, but basically it's kind of like a contracting job. We have a plan here, and you could be helpful. Now, this plan would be conducted by, or was being conducted by, individuals who believe that this issue should move forward, right? And those are the ones that were interacting with him. Those that were opposed to the idea either didn't know about it or they just didn't have access to him. And so Tom starts to allude to this program, and then he makes an announcement in 2016 when he goes on with George Knapp and says, wow, we're about to do this. We're gonna do films. We're going to do documentaries. Things are going to happen. I'm in contact with the Pentagon. I'm talking to people at Skunk Works. Also, he was saying that 10-person advisory committee. This is very powerful stuff that he's talking about, and a lot of people didn't believe it because it was simply too powerful. Like, they couldn't put that together, and that was in 2016. So he's approached in 2015. He makes the move in early 2016, and the one thing that people may not be factoring here is that that period from January 2015 all the way through to the election, there was a very important political initiative going on trying to connect Hillary Clinton to the issue in the mind of the media, and it was catching fire. And there were articles that started in actually late 2014 that went on one after another, eventually over 400, that were literally flat out talking about her connection to the ET issue, the Rockefeller Initiative, Pan Podesta's issue, and so forth, and highlighting the interviews that they had made. They made a number of statements. It was generating a huge amount of press. All that was happening in that period, and it was in that period that the Pentagon reached out to Tom DeLonge. Why? I would speculate, and this is just a speculation, and I put it out there so that some of the media may want to ask about it, is that you have people favorable to this issue in the Pentagon, in the CIA, some of which are contactees, which just increase their interest. We've always known there's contactees simply based on the numbers. There has to be contactees. You have to have thousands of employees. So these people wanting to move forward, and what did they see? They see that Hillary Clinton is running for president again, and she is the leading candidate to be president. She's practically the presumptive president. It's simply a matter of inaugurating her. And the issue about her connection to the issue and her husband's connection is coming out in the press day after day. And they say, whoa, this is heading towards some sort of resolution. And so we need to take advantage of that. We also need to position ourselves. We need to position the Pentagon and the CIA as on the side of transparency, the side of getting the truth to the American people. We just don't want to sit on this and suddenly be confronted by a new president saying, well, I guess it's time to disclose. And so they reach out to Tom, and I think it was connected to a significant way to her candidacy and the media's involvement with that candidacy and the outing of her ET connections. So Tom makes the announcement in 2016. He says that certain people are involved, certain inside people and so forth, and we move on, and what happens? She loses the election. Well, that changed everything. That completely changed the equations that anyone at the Pentagon and the CIA were looking at. In fact, it also threw our political situation into chaos. And immediately Tom disappears. You don't hear from him at all for months. And finally, he emerges many months later. And what he says is that, well, we've had some difficulties. We're having to reorganize. He indicates that a couple of the inside people that are involved had to step back, right? And we're trying to get things together. It takes him 8 months to get things together. And what we end up having is that he forms a new group, but there's no working insiders in this group. But they worked it out so a couple of key people come on board just after leaving the service, right? So that there's not that problem. An insider, a working Pentagon person in that group would be a big problem for the Pentagon. They don't want to do that. And so they conveniently retire. Elizondo says he resigned, all right? Yeah, maybe he did, but it's kind of convenient that way. It kind of makes it a little easier to explain the situation. Did he really resign, or was it like, look, you're going to do a resignation, we need to get you out so that you can get involved in this program on the outside? Who knows? But then they reconfigured, and then they make the announcement October the 22nd. 8 months now, 9 months into the new presidency. What's going on here? I'm suggesting, as a speculation, that they made a significant move, that they needed to get ahead of the game, because clearly a disclosure process was underway and a new president was coming who was certainly, in my view, wanted to be the disclosure president. The media was getting on this and they wanted to get ahead of the game. And suddenly the politics changed completely. They didn't know, what the hell are we going to do? And let me make it clear, well, some people think otherwise. By and large, the military and intelligence community is not a fan of the current president. They don't have confidence in the current president, and they're very worried about what can happen during that presidency. And so this issue coming out under those circumstances is not particularly attractive to them. However, they'd already let the cat out of the bag. They'd already gotten Tom DeLonge involved. He'd already written a book. And then, of course, when the Podesta files came out, the WikiLeaks files that were released, the 50,000 Podesta emails, confirmed all of Tom DeLonge's involvement there with Podesta and the Democrats, trying to introduce him to inside people at Skunk Works and what have you. Notice, by the way, that he approached the Podesta side. He did not approach the Republican side. And that makes sense, because obviously I think Clinton was up to her ears in this issue and wanted to disclose as soon as she was president. And so that all came out. And so the thing is out of the bag. They regroup and they realize they couldn't put the toothpaste back in the tube. It's now 9 months into the presidency. There's a lot of speculation that Trump will not be around that much longer. And so they're kind of playing it down the middle. This is a very, very complicated game, a very complicated strategy with a lot of moving parts. Very difficult on the part of the inside, the Pentagon and the CIA, to move on this. And yet they are effectively advancing it in a relatively orderly fashion. But be assured, they know far more than they're saying. There is up to its ears in this issue and has never stopped researching this issue. This idea they did it for 5 years and stopped, nonsense. They've been researching this phenomena, re-engineering technology, studying dead bodies since 1940s. But again, this is all part of the show, part of the, I guess you could say, the kabuki theater that they have to do, because this damn thing is so complicated and it's been embargoed so long. I mean, that's the best way I can put this, try to give you a sense of the longer picture.
Can I add
thank you, Steve. I think that's it. Yeah, I wanted to ask you about adding your own analysis, but also, Grant, throw in the idea, was Henry Reid a complete surprise? And how would you go about disclosure? But go ahead, comment.
Well, I think they played it brilliantly. I think this is, you know, like Tom DeLonge said, every word that's been written has been planned for months. I heard about this planning a year ago, and I knew the players, and there was all these things about delay, about trying to, because a lot of what DeLonge was trying to do is trying to get this $1 billion for this big Spielberg thing, which all fell through. So he's spending a lot of time with that, but all the rest of it, it's all the same players. They were moving it, and as Steve says, there's a lot of moving parts. In order to pull this thing off, to get it into 3 major newspapers on the same day without some, you know, interest that doesn't want this out there stopping you, they had to be very careful how they did it, how they manipulate it, and it has worked. I mean, Chris Mellon talks about the fact that no matter what you think and what you can see up front, he says, I can guarantee you that there are a lot of people knocking and phoning senators right now inside. There's all sorts of stuff's going to be going on, pressuring senators. What the hell's going on? How come we didn't know about this? And this is something we're not seeing on the outside. But it looks like you could actually have a congressional interest in this, some sort of hearing, because according to Chris Mellon, you may not see it, but a lot of people are going to be under pressure now to answer for this and what's going on and why was this covered up and this sort of stuff. The other thing I wanted to sort of make people aware of, and they probably know, is the fact that this issue may be at Trump's door faster than you think, because this guy by the name of Jordan Fabian from The Hill actually asked a question. And this does not happen very often in the White House press room. It happened in January of 1954. It happened in 1997 when Webster Hubbell's book created a question, and then it happened last May when Hillary was running around, and the New York Times on May the 10th did this straight up piece on Hillary disclosing, and then 3 reporters stood up and they asked the UFO question, and now it's been asked again by this Jordan Fabian. And in a later interview, he asked, of course he asked the wrong question, but he said, does the president believe in it? Which is not the question you want. It was the president briefed. And he said, is he going to reissue the money to this program? And of course, the press secretary can always walk around it because she's not briefed. So she said, well, we haven't talked about this, but I'm gonna ask him, and I'll come around with the answer. So far, she hasn't come back with the answer. But Fabian said in a later interview that he talked to her after he asked the question, after the press thing was over, and she said that in the background they always have this briefing before they go out for the press briefing with what questions are they going to ask, and they're anticipating the questions, and they did anticipate the UFO question, except they said nobody will ask it. That's a good question, but nobody's ever going to ask the question. So that's always this thing, is that the media has, they're always embarrassed with the issue. It's sort of like you give it to the junior reporter, you got 24 hours, just do some little thing, and nobody wants to touch this issue. And now you have a situation where they're all scrambling because they realize how much money you can make from this thing, and everybody seems to be very interested in the story. And you have National Public Radio, and you've got BBC, and you've got CNN doing numerous stories. And I think it's extremely positive that it's moved it. And one more comment on the metal. If you follow Jacques Vallée, you know Jacques Vallée has all this metal that has been accumulated over the years that was dropped out of UFOs, these UFOs that pretended they were, in trouble, and they would shoot this metal out, and people would grab the metal, and they would always be written off as crazy people who believed that this was metal. It was just ordinary metal. And Jacques Vallée has done all this work on these various pieces of metal, and has these very strange isotope ratios in these metals, and basically is indicating this stuff was not produced on Earth. And Jacques Vallée, as you will know, wrote one of the intro or the forwards to Tom DeLonge's book. So he's in this game as well. So that is part of the metal that they'll be talking about. There's this stuff that came from NASA. Then there's going to be Vallée's metal, and then we'll see what else they've got.
Well, Grant, just one more question. How would, since you probably studied this question about disclosure among, the presidents and Congress for the last, what's happening for the last 70 years, how do you see their plan of action? What steps from here do you think they're going to take over the next few months and years? If you were behind it, what would you do as this sort of thing progresses?
Well, they've done it already. They've basically laid the foundation for how this thing unfolds. They've released the fact that there are 70 plus reports. So there's going to be pressure for Bigelow to talk about this. Bigelow will give an interview. They will release one of these reports. I hear stories that they're going to put, there's a big TV deal that's about to happen. Somebody's going to go on TV. You have 24 films, and Elizondo said they're all coming out. So they're just going to gradually drip. They're going to drip these films out. They're going to release more stuff. They're talking about this piece of metal, and they're talking 48 crash. So DeLonge will appear with this piece of metal, or one of the people rather than DeLonge. They'll send out one of the Justice or somebody to talk about this metal. I think it's going to move away from Tom DeLonge. I don't think you're going to see Tom DeLonge giving many interviews. It's going to be these high-level guys, but they're just going to drip this stuff out. They have all these reports. Everybody knows they have this place in Nevada where they had 46 full-time investigators on this thing. George Knapp is giving interviews. He did another one today. He's releasing this and the connection to Skinwalker Ranch. And there's just piles of stories of keeping the pressure on with Reed to get the congressional thing. They've done all that they needed to do. They did it all in one day with these stories. It's all basically set up. We know what they've got now, and it's a matter of reporters who now realize there's money to be made, there's blood in the water, and these reporters are going to be going after Bigelow, they're going to be going after Knapp, and they're going to be going after Justice, and they're going to be asking, where's this material? And it's just a matter of time till all these reports and this material starts to leak out.
That's great. I really think so. I also think they're gauging the public's reaction as well as the media reaction. So, Steve, where does this leave you as an activist? What's your next step in this? Because you're a player in this big field of disclosure, and where do you go from here?
Well, I know one thing. I wish I'd practiced the guitar more when I was in high school. I just wasn't dedicated to it that much.
But you're dedicated.
As I say, Tom is, and he's the quarterbacking that team. Obviously, they're going to be center stage because they are the insiders. But I'm going to try to help and contribute the best I can. But Tom was a millionaire before they raised $2 million off the funding for the public service company, and they're going to raise millions more. So I'm very limited. I don't have the funds to do the kinds of things I'd like to do. I'm going to launch a new website, or rather relaunch my website, completely renovated, in a couple of weeks, and I'm speaking at a couple of conferences. And then I do have one significant project which I hope to announce in early February. But let me point out again something else that Grant alluded to. I want to restate this. I believe that they are moving forward on this, but they are not happy with the prospect of a Trump administration engaging this issue. It is a real problem for them. I could go into greater length about that, but just leave it at this point. I should point out that if you review the announcement from October 22nd, if you watch all of the videos, which I have, of the interviews of these principals and their statements, and Tom DeLonge's statements, and his interviews with Knapp, and on, go through it all, never will any one of these individuals ever mention President Trump. Never did, right? That should tell you something. And so I sense that one of the reasons that they regrouped in October and decided we can't just walk away from this, we've got to move this, but we've got to keep the pace from not getting too fast, is because they have calculated, and keep in mind, the Pentagon and the CIA have access to assessments and information that even the reporters don't have. They have ascertained in their mind that Trump's tenure is not long, that he probably will have to, how would you step aside for health reasons or something in early next year, and they'll be dealing with a different president. Will it be Pence? Will it be Ryan? Will it be someone elected by the Congress? We don't know. And that, of course, would be a little less of a problem for them. But their choices, they only had two choices. Completely stop everything and just say, okay, Tom is told, well, we just have to stop now, which would have raised a lot of red flags, or proceed at a slower pace, so that they would have a more favorable political situation when things really get going. In other words, who's going to be the disclosure president? Now, there's one other thing I want to add here. If you want to say, how can I contribute, little old me? For the last 10, 15, well, actually last 10 years, I've given God knows how many interviews, maybe 1,000. And on hundreds of these interviews, I have talked about the fact, and this was brought up by one of the people. It's brought up in the New York Times report. There are other heads of state that can announce the extraterrestrial presence. The United States doesn't control all the heads of state in this planet. And the two most significant ones are Xi Jinping and Putin is number one there. In other words, at any time, Vladimir Putin could make the announcement to his people in the world, and the United States would be held holding the bag. And so that is a constant threat. And I have raised that issue over and over again in interview after interview, specifically so the Pentagon would not forget that that is a possibility to keep pressure on them. Well, on May the 3rd of this year, I went to Moscow and gave a very long interview to a national Russian network. And not a lot of people knew about it, but it was sort of known. And I'm now releasing excerpts of that to the internet. And over the next couple of weeks, the whole hour and a half is going to get released. And in that interview in Moscow, I did something that's never happened before. I talked about the politics of disclosure, both for the United States and for Russia, and specifically talked about the pros and cons of Putin being the disclosure head of state. No one had ever brought this issue up on Russian media let alone on Russian soil. And that was deliberate. And I also had 6 meetings with 6 different groups while I was in Moscow that are working on this issue. Most of these individuals had worked in the Russian and Soviet government on this subject. We're now out of government. Kind of sounds familiar, doesn't it? And I knew that by taking those meetings, it guaranteed that the Kremlin would know what was going on if they didn't already. But obviously, the Pentagon and CIA, I assure you, knew that there was this activist talking about Putin in Moscow. Now, what does that mean? I'm just saying that they're contending with a lot of variables here, and one of the scariest for them is that a head of state other than the United States president will be the state. On the other hand, they got a problem because they're not keen on the idea that disclosure president being Trump. And so they're having to juggle this thing, work it out so that hopefully it comes from the US, but hopefully not from Trump, and it definitely doesn't come from Putin. So that's kind of the hand they're having to play. And this is complicated. And I'm not saying I can just write an essay and prove this, but I've been in this a long time and I do know some things, and I believe that this is a factor, and I hope the press gets on this and asks these kinds of questions.
Can I ask a question for Steve?
Yeah, and I also want to ask you about the international response to December 16th as well, Grant. So go ahead.
Well, my question for Steve is, Steve's spent a lot of time on the Hill. He's talked to a lot of senators and representatives, and we had at the citizens hearing, we had, a panel there. And my question is, has he gone back to the people who were sympathetic? Because we had 4 senators that put this thing forward. This wasn't, some guy that thought this thing up. This was 4 senators who were sympathetic to the issue. Has he talked to any of the people on the Hill who are sympathetic to the issue, and can he get them to move and give support to this issue over all the people he's talked to in Washington over the years?
That would be nice, but since the election, I've been pretty much wiped out. I've been in London for the last 4 months, and the political situation, and as you know, in Washington, D.C. is absolute insane. And it's Trump, 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 day in, day out, 24 hours a day. So it would have been virtually useless to try to do that. The Congress is wrapped up in a massive partisan battle to the death. So no. Now, what's happened in the last couple of weeks, going back to October 22nd, the pot's getting stirred, things are getting interesting. And if I can get some funding and get back in the game, I think that there will be a time when I can get back up on the Hill and get a hell of a lot better response than I have in the past. But let's be clear. There are like 7 or 8 investigations underway of the president, including FBI and several committees and so forth. There's a potential for indictments. We're talking a Watergate times 5 here. So the idea that we're going to shove this ET thing now suddenly into that mix and we're going to get some congressional response, that's not going to happen. However, there's plenty that can be accomplished prior to that. In other words, what we need to do now is not only excite the American people, but get the media deeper and deeper into this. Look, I was talking to Ralph Blumenthal going back early into the election, trying to get him to get involved. He wasn't quite ready because he's writing a book on the ET issue, believe it or not. He's going to announce it pretty soon. I was talking to William Broad. I talked to a lot of reporters. They were getting so close to jumping into this in a big way that I was feeling very optimistic of disclosure under Obama. But the story, it was political, and there was an election underway, and so they only went so far, but God knows they wrote a lot of articles, but they were ready to go. If Hillary Clinton wins the election, they were going to jump all over it.
Have you talked to any of them since?
No. The reporters, I'm sending them stuff all the time, and I'm watching the articles and how things are unfolding. Remember, I've sort of been out of the game for a little bit, but now the thing, what Tom has done and what's happening right now is more compact. It's the political initiative I was running on the Clinton campaign was stretched out over 2 years. It was far more difficult for people to sort of jump into it, though the press was getting excited. What Tom has generated here is basically the modern version of some of the things that happened back in the 60s or 50s And it's very powerful. There are now people committed inside the military intelligence complex to back this up. And so this has much more, I think, potential to generate a media frenzy of the magnitude that would force a rapprochement between the Pentagon and the White House and deliver disclosure to the American people. The question is, how quickly and who will be president when it happens?
Because I contacted Damon Steer, who is the guy who asked the question to Hillary.
Yeah.
And he's very open to, you know, I said, okay, now are you going to do something? Like, here it is. And I had some conversations. I would think that there would be a lot of reporters that you talked to in the past who maybe you couldn't move them, and suddenly they realize this thing's for real, that you could actually get some movement in terms of them doing something or taking a step now.
Believe me, I'm more than happy. I'm starting to do some interviews, but keep in mind that all of these reporters, and of course, most importantly, their editors, they're still digesting what's going on. I mean, this just happened. I mean, the major drop was on the 16th. That was 7 days ago. The October 22nd announcement, that wasn't even a press conference. They just basically did an announcement on Facebook. Again, part of the pacing. And so the larger media, particularly at the editorial level, they are still in the process of trying to get their minds around this. So let's give them through the end of the into January, maybe to the end of January, a chance to really get a sense of this, and then I think it'll be a lot easier to maybe work with them and direct them into certain places. But no, it's not like I can just suddenly call people up and say, well, now let's get going. No, it doesn't work that way.
Okay.
Actually, in the chat room, Steve, people are talking about how to fund you and your further research. So how can they do that for you?
Well, I'm not a researcher, but if they want to fund the advocacy work, if you go to my website, paradigmresearchgroup.org, there's a GoFundMe link on the left, and there's a straight contribution link on the right, an internal contribution link. And, you know, all I can say is if people would like to see the advocacy process, the political advocacy process supported as well. I know Tom has got a lot of money, and he's going to get even more. But the political advocacy is virtually no funding at all. And I understand that. I mean, I get it. I understand why Bigelow made the choices he made and put his money. If Bigelow had put his money into the political advocacy, he would have created a lot of problems for himself that could have affected his relationships with NASA and his relationships with a lot of insiders. Because he did not do that, he was able to become part of the research program and to establish contacts and get involved in this high-level work. And so he needs to be applauded for that. However, it's very worth noting, and I don't know if this was planned or whether this was just Bigelow had gotten to a point of deep frustration. But remember, before the October 22nd announcement by Tom DeLonge and his people, Bigelow goes on 60 Minutes to be interviewed with regard to the launching of the first test of his flexible habitat on the space station. And knowing in advance he was going to be asked a UFO question, naturally, because of his involvement, he knew what he was going to say. The reporter, I forget her name, Larson or something, she didn't know what he was going to say. And so when she brought up that UFO question, just as a matter of course, he hits her right in the nose with a, yeah, there's extraterrestrials here. When she looks at him like, what? And she goes, well, don't you think people might be kind of crazy? Think you're crazy about that? And he says, I don't give a damn. Bigelow basically in that moment was saying, you know, I've been in this since 1995. I have researched, I know more stuff than the entire network that you represent combined. And I'm fed up with the fact that you guys continue to dance around this issue and pull your punches and not really get serious because you're completely mesmerized by this truth embargo. And I'm just fed up. And so, damn it, yeah, there's extra truth here, right? Now, was that intentional or was that frustration? It might have been intentional because obviously it was a perfect prelude to what was going to happen just a month or two later on October the 22nd. Now they followed up with another drop. And so you have a 1, 2, 3 Bigelow, To the Stars Academy announcement, and then the drop of the Air Force surveillance gun camera tape. I tell you, it's brilliant. It's a winning strategy. They drop a couple more things like that, and we're going to be having a disclosure party sometime in 2018.
I hope so. And I'm going to take some questions, but I just want to ask Grant one more question from me is what has been the international response to December 16th? And is something percolating? Is it growing worldwide, this disclosure movement?
Well, no, it doesn't really matter. I don't think it really matters what the international thing is, except what Steve is talking about, that somebody may make a move to disclose. This is an issue that's basically been controlled by the Americans. And so all the reaction, like, for example, the Washington Post story was covered by the Chinese daily news. But in terms of this issue, it's still an issue that the American government controls, has been leaking out in little bits and pieces, and that's where all my efforts are, is to try to move it there. I don't think Canada, like I'm in Canada, I don't think the Canadian government really is going to make any move or think about it, or the people on the street sort of know the story, but in terms of reaction, it's more important to me that I impressed a lot of my people that I was talking to in the last little while, is write your senator. This is the time to write a written, not an email, but a written letter to your senator and say, what the hell's going on is paid $22 million for this. I want to see the files, and to put some pressure on senators to at least even make a comment to citizens where we can sort of get the people to sort of push on this issue, because now is the time. This thing is opened up. They've opened it up for us. And it's up to researchers, to lobbyists, to people on the street to move it. Because one of the things I showed was I posted on Facebook when this question was asked of Trump, I said everybody should tweet this guy and tell him thank you for asking the question and keep pushing. And basically there was about 3 or 4 other reporters who actually retweeted he had a message on there that said the truth is out there, and he had a little alien face. And a bunch of reporters retweeted it, but the general public, there was nothing. There was like 3 people that said good job, and there was one guy who said, like, quit asking stupid questions. So if you're a reporter and you don't get the support from the people to encourage you to keep going and to ask more questions, you just sort of, what's the point? If nobody's interested, if there's no pressure on the government, and that's what I think is this whole story is American government, and the pressure's got to be on them. And I think the DeLong, whatever this operation is, has done massive damage to the cover-up. As far as I'm concerned, there's absolutely no way they can turn this around.
Well, DeLong did hint out that this is a complicated subject involving supposed enemies or people that aren't friendly working together with them to release this. So he hinted there was some kind of international connection to releasing this. Do you remember that?
No, I don't remember. I don't remember him referencing that. And I know a lot of his people. I've always known a lot of the people who were involved. I knew Semivan long before he joined DeLong.
Steve, what were you saying?
Well, it's worth noting that there's been tons of international coverage of this. I had one supporter in France send me like 30 links to 30 French articles. That's just France alone. So the articles are being written all over the world, right? It's very hard to bring those up on Google, right? Because your Google search is in English, and so you can't find them. But if you really put the work at it, I'm sure there have been hundreds and hundreds of articles, which is obviously raising the issue internationally. And that just increases the prospects that a head of state like Putin might decide to make a move. And so it's not trivial. But the focus clearly is going to be on the United States for a while. And again, I think that they have a plan that is designed to trigger disclosure, ultimately, force it out sometime in 2018, not in January, not in February, more like the mid-year, right? Hopefully after there's been some sort of resolution of this political chaos, right? The storm that we're going through right now will have subsided, and things will be a little more basic. I think that is a good plan, and if you look at the pacing, it seems to be working out. But again, even as powerful as what just happened, that's not enough to trigger disclosure. It's going to take more than that. but they have time, and I think you're going to see people lining up behind them. But right now, it's still very early, and people are just trying to get their minds around this and decide what to do. And everybody right now is thinking, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? Including me, right? It's not easy. What do I do? It's not easy to come up with something overnight. However, I do have a few things I think I can contribute to this. And but I'm rooting for Tom. I'm rooting for Tom and that team that he put together. No one's ever put together a team like that. You know, what can I say? He did it, and he's going to get a lot of credit for what he's done.
Right. So the question from the chat room, one of them is the deep state question. How does this benefit the deep state? And added to that, to both of you, who's behind it? Who is the decision maker? It's not actually the people we see at all. There must be some hidden force or person or group that's behind these front people. And how does that connect to, and how does that benefit the deep state?
Well, first of all, I'm not much of a fan of the deep state idea. It's a meaningless term to me. All right, it's just one of these memes that's out there that people are comfortable with. I'm not comfortable with it. Secondly, it's not like, oh, there must be a single person in an office somewhere directing this. No, people forget how huge our government is, how huge the Pentagon is, even the CIA and the intelligence community in general. Many departments, many managers, and so consequently, what we're seeing is decisions being made by groups of individuals within these organizations who have a certain amount of leeway to advance the issue and are doing so without violating the law or violating their non-disclosure agreements. And that's what's behind it. It's not some overriding secret force, all right? But it's also notable that at the same time, those in power who could possibly stop this, and believe me, if the Pentagon or the CIA didn't want these guys working with Tom DeLonge, they would not be working with Tom DeLonge. Trust me on that, all right? They are not moving to stop it. And so what you're also seeing possibly is a recognition on the part of even the harder core truth embargo advocates, that it's no longer a fight they can win. They're kind of, how would you say, surrendering to the inevitable.
Yeah, I would agree.
Grant.
I would agree with Steve. I'm not a big fan of the deep state or all these conspiracy stuff. The people that I've met, and as I said, I know some of the people who are in this game. I've known about this story for a long time, and they're just people. Two of them are experiencers. They had beings in their room. So they're not the evil guys. They're trying to figure it out for themselves. And that they are working inside the government, inside the law. They know the problems they have to try to move this thing out. And what you had, as far as I'm concerned, is a bunch of people carefully in the background decided we have to get this thing out. How are we going to get it out so we don't get crushed by the opposition? They know there's an opposition. They played their cards. They were very careful, and they moved it out. And they're working according to the law. They're good people. And when it comes to the president, what I say is the president is agreeing to this whole thing. And this brings up a whole new story. I follow Ron Pandolfi around quite a bit. And on January the 6th, Ron Pandolfi sent an email to Robert Collins, who was the Condor in the Avery, and he said, Trump is pro-disclosure and against disinformation, and I'll wait. I can't remember his term was. I'll wait a while till we do something. And so the way I see it is it works, that this is not a thing where one president makes a decision. The way I described it was Michael Hayden does the briefing for President Obama, and he calls it the wake-up call, or the getting his attention stage, where he says to the president in the presidential election, or the president-elect, when he's briefing him on intelligence and covert ops and stuff like that, he says, okay, we're doing this, we're doing this, we're doing this, we're doing this, we're doing this. And when you put your hand on the Bible at 12 noon in Washington, unless you tell us to stop, we're still going to be doing this and this and this and this. And what Hayden says is there are certain things that happen in the government that are done in the office of the president, not by the president himself. And I think this is one of those things. I say they've been disclosing, they've been dropping this stuff for years. And this is a thing where Trump was told, okay, this is an operation that's going on. He didn't stop it. And this was an indication that Pandolfi had, was that Trump wasn't interested, but he said, to go along with this thing. And so the thing is unraveling. That's why it really didn't make any difference that Hillary Clinton lost. They just sort of put another player in her place and ran it through. I was talking this disclosure thing with Hillary before already, that there was this move. There was these people that were saying that they were going to drop this. I mean, this people got to remember, this Tom DeLonge thing was going on when Hillary was there. And this is not something that just started in the Donald Trump administration.
But you also talked about Ron Pandolfi playing sort of a good cop, bad cop. He reacted to the news. Can you just repeat what his tweet was about?
Okay, so his main guy that sort of is his mouthpiece is a guy by the name of Dan Smith. So as soon as Tom DeLonge had his news conference, in fact, we were helping Dan Smith get on the internet, and we said, Dan, you got to watch this. We got to watch this. And so he watched it, and then he got Ron's reaction, and Ron came out with this bizarre reaction that this is a scam by Harold Putoff, and I'm thinking, like, how could you possibly believe that in terms of, dropping the film and all this kind of stuff? And he's still maintaining this. And then there's the story that happened a couple of days ago that WikiLeaks gets involved. And Julian Assange posts basically Ron's position, that this is parapsychology, Scientology, scam by Harold Putoff and stuff. And then Dan Smith says that Ron actually wrote the thing and gave it to Julian Assange. So whether he's playing the bad cop, whether he just doesn't know what's going on, because early on, about a year ago, when I was talking to them, Dan Smith didn't know who Tom DeLonge was. And I said, you're at the center of power. You're with this guy that supposedly briefed the last 6 presidents, and you've known the guy for 26 years, and you don't know who Tom DeLonge is? And then, so he said, they started this, he's a misinformation thing. Then I brought up Jim Semivan, and then basically Ron denied. No, there's no such guy. No, this is garbage. This I think he called me a loon. And so Dan actually said, you should stop talking about this. Take this down. Quit talking about this. The story isn't true. So then I started sending photographs of Jim Semivan to Dan Smith. And then suddenly it was, oh yeah, the guy exists, but Jim Semivan isn't his name. So they played this game, and it's almost whether Ron doesn't know. I think he's got to know. And maybe it's the fact, because what I was told is that Semivan, and then we talked about this thing, people retire and then they become operational. So you move it from the white world to the black world, and this is where this game is being played, in the black world. So when Jim Semivan, he's an experiencer, and he asks Tenet, the CIA director, when he has the experience in the 1990s, he wanted to know what was going on. They said, you don't want this in your career. This is going to destroy your career. But he's briefed when he leaves the CIA in 2008. What I was told is that Ron Pandolfi briefed him, which would indicate to me that Ron may be behind this whole thing, and they're playing this thing where you need some opposition to the story. So maybe Ron is putting opposition to the story and saying this is a scam, but it's a totally nonsensical thing that, that they made this, Scientology is behind this thing. It's almost as bad as the deep state explanation for the false flag. And there is a false flag aspect to this thing, that everybody, no matter who they are, everybody's going to spin this story to suit their own ends. So you have city people coming out and saying it's total nonsense and this kind of stuff, because their job's on the line. The same as the Defense Department is going to spin this as a threat because they want to increase their defense budget. And if suddenly you have good aliens here and the world all unites and we don't have any enemies anymore, they're out of business. So everybody's going, based upon their belief of how the world works, is going to spin this to their advantage. So there is a false flag aspect to this thing that you can bet the military is now going to be talking about evil aliens, and we need to increase the defense budget, the black ops and stuff, to increase their defense budget.
Hey, Steve, do you go along with that false flag idea? And also, well, answer that question. I have another one for you, Steve.
Let's say this. The false flag concern is legitimate. I get it. It's been way overplayed. And I don't see it yet. So we're a long ways away from this group of people talking about evil aliens, if ever. But as I pointed out before, the fundamental basis for the Pentagon to spend any money on this would be from a national security perspective, not because they just really want to know what alien civilizations are like so they can mimic their quality of life. And so it's always going to have that sort of taint, but there is no sign yet that they are trying to create a basis for a military buildup or a scare tactic directed at the American people. And until I see that, I'm going to assume that they're playing this relatively straight within the context of the fact that they have to operate within certain constraints. As far as Pandolfi, I've talked to Pandolfi. I've interacted with him some. I have a hunch that, well, first of all, I think Ron Pandolfi is not a disclosure guy. I think he's a truth embargo guy. Nothing wrong with that. It's a legitimate position, right? He's been involved in the issue, yes. But if you look at the total history, I don't think he's a disclosure guy. And I think he might have been a little surprised by these announcements when they came out. I don't know if he saw something that strong turning up. He may have interacted with Semivan 7 years ago, but the Tom DeLonge thing only starts about 2 years ago, and I think that it moved a little faster than he thought, and he reacted with a negative response. I don't, that these guys are beyond good cop, bad cop stuff. That's low level game playing. These guys are advanced. I think he caught him by surprise, and he's a little concerned. I don't think he's the only one, and that's to be expected. And now the question is, who lines up and who doesn't behind this issue? That remains to be seen. But I expect we're going to see more people coming forward, particularly, and here's another very important point to keep in mind. This release of this gun camera footage, which is very spectacular and got a lot of press, keep in mind that there have been thousands of pilot reports for decades. NARCAP has got a file of 3,500 plus pilot reports, which were given to them because the government has, or the military has threatened pilots with losing their flying privileges for decades if they talk publicly about this. And so the number of pilot sightings that could theoretically come forward is least. Importantly, the imprimatur provided to this issue now by the New York Times, which was like Watergate level reportage there. Right now across the country, there are witnesses and pilots and inside people now retired who are contemplating, should I come forward myself? In other words, we're looking at a potential Me Too campaign on the issue developing here.
Okay, I think Neil wants us to wrap up soon, but I do have like a final question for both of you. If you could sit down with Tom DeLonge or someone from the To the Stars panel, what would you ask them? And what would you say to them? So, Steve, you want to take that question and I'll talk to Grant? What would you say to Tom DeLonge and To the Stars?
That's simple. I would say, Tom, how can I help? That's it. How can I help?
Do you have a question for that you would ask Tom or any of these people?
I would say the question would be, what can I do to help you achieve what you've set out to do? All right.
And how do you see you could help them? How would you volunteer your help towards them?
Well, here's the dilemma. I'm a political activist. My job is to rattle cages, put pressure out there, basically speak truth to power, that kind of thing. In other words, one of the reasons I don't get invited on CNN and MSNBC and these shows anymore is because I don't hedge my language. I don't pull my punches. I don't talk about alleged, ET sightings or UFOs. I talk about extraterrestrials, and I talk about it as a matter of fact. That's a little problematic for others. Particularly, Tom would probably have a problem with that. So the political activism right now is more probably more like a negative, and so in general, I think they probably will want to stay out of my zone, but should he want somebody who has maybe an ability to communicate this issue to the masses, to the larger people, to put it in context, which I think relates to them, and has a good reputation, then maybe I could be helpful in that regard. But I hesitate to tell him what he needs. I mean, they are in center stage right now, and I view myself as a support person.
Well, when I talked to Leslie Kane a few years back, when she was hanging out with Bud Hopkins, she said the first plan was to just acknowledge there's unexplained aerial phenomena and take it from there. So so that was sort of, I think somehow Leslie fits into this whole big thing. So Grant, what would you ask Tom DeLonge and the panel?
I'll tell you what I asked Tom DeLonge, but first I'd like to make a point that I've forgotten the whole thing, that this is only one initiative. I say this is, they rolled this thing out. This is part of they've done this over and over again for 70 years. There are 2 other initiatives going on at the same time. There's a documentary initiative by Pandolfi where they're going to drop the idea that we have portal technology. I was actually offered an in on that, and I turned it down. I said, no, I didn't want to be a part of it. And the Condyne, if you follow John Burroughs, the Condyne, they're supposed to be releasing more files. I've heard 16 files by the end of this month or early next month, and there's files coming out of New Zealand, I heard. So there's all sorts of operations. What Pandolfi was putting out was that there was multiple teams. Chris Bledsoe, who was one of my contacts with the DeLonge operation, said there was 6 teams at this present time that are dropping stuff into the public. So that's basically something people got to realize. This is not one thing that happened. This is nothing new. They've been doing this. There's all sorts of people operating behind the scenes. Now, as to what I would ask, I've already asked. And what I asked is what's happening next. And this is where I was told it is about to begin. You've seen nothing. And I've heard this for months and months and months. And the only thing I can really reveal without revealing what it is, because I'm not really 100% sure, is there's going to be a TV event. Somebody's going on TV.
Wait, say that again. Oh, you cut out. What is it going to be?
There's going to be, from what I heard, there may be a TV event. One of the figures is going to go on TV.
And that's all the information you have right now.
Kind of thing, yeah.
A major TV event. They're going. That's one of the things I heard. But they said that it's only begun. You have not seen anything yet. I heard that over and over and over again. And that was people who told me a year ago exactly what was going to happen on Saturday, and were 100% accurate.
Yeah, let me add this, Alan. I've said this before, going back years. I knew that as we approached, quote, disclosure, the actual final disclosure event, it was going to be very chaotic. There was going to be many, many different groups operating from different directions. I mean, look, it's a big world. This is a global issue. There are thousands of organizations and groups that are aware of this issue. And so it's going to be wild and crazy. Believe me, it's not going to be a nice, simple moving of the pieces on the board. It's going to be very complicated, kind of nuts, but the outcome will be the same. Ultimately, we get disclosure, but it's not going to be simple. And that's why I held off talking about Tom's work for now, several months since the announcement, only because I didn't want to just jump in and start trying to say this, say that about it, because there's too complicated. I want to get something to sort of orbit. And now I've got to absorb what's going on with the announcements from about the new program, or the TS whatever the hell it is program that was run under Bigelow. So, but there's more. And so, look, I think I invite people to try to kind of keep their heads about them and stay chill and not get too worked up, because this is going to get a lot more complicated before it gets simple.
Well, this I feel is the most exciting story that can be in the news, and I think 2018 looks like it will push this envelope further, this issue, and it's just going to explode. I feel like we're really at the beginning of a whole new world, a whole new paradigm of John Mack would say, this is not about belief, this is about proof, this is about sightings, it's about experience. And so I think we're coming into a new way of looking at the world and ourselves and the universe. And I can't think of anything more exciting. I think you both are at the cutting edge. And so any final words, Grant, and also tell people how to find you and what's coming up for you in the next couple of months.
Final thoughts are that this is a big event. I say it's basically over. It's just now it's a matter of unraveling the rest of it. They've put it so far out that they cannot stop it now. Everybody knows they have all these documents and gun camera footage and material and stuff. So I would say that. As to what I'm doing is I'm basically spending like 18 hours a day doing updates to this story, which I'm putting at my Whitehouse UFO YouTube channel, and they are getting 100,000 hits. So people are watching. People are very interested in this story. This is what the New York Times said. This is the biggest story they've done for years. And I would encourage everybody to put their stuff out, to contact their Congress people, and because this thing, as far as I know, and I trust the people that I'm listening to, this thing is about to roll.
Steve, what about you? Where you're at in the next couple of months and what's happening? And final words.
Yeah, I agree with Grant. This is not containable. And so logically, we're going to see a period here, process where something is going to break in 2018. It's hard for me to imagine that somehow this is going to be derailed, or some group of skeptics are going to put it back in the can. More importantly, and I think this is something I want to remind the Pentagon every day, that the closer the U.S. gets to disclosure, the closer we get to finally pulling this out, the greater the incentive for Vladimir Putin to act ahead of us. He doesn't have the public relations issues and the political complications that we have here. If he wants to disclose on Monday, he will do it. If he needs something from his military or intelligence to do that with, he can have it. He doesn't have to go through all these games. He doesn't have to play these games. And so that's another factor they need to consider. They can take their time, but understand, Vladimir can pull this rug out from under us in 24 hours. And so I hope that they're resolute and consistent and try to get this done, hopefully no later than spring of next year, maybe summer.
Can I make one more comment? Someone just mentioned the upcoming conferences. We're doing Contact in the Desert, and I'm doing this at Contact in the Desert. So if you want the latest material, and it's coming very fast, I'll be doing an entire lecture as to where it stands on that day. And I'm also doing another big lecture at UFO Con for Laurie and Fenton in San Jose, California. And we're going to go, I've just discovered that somebody has done the same work I've done. Melinda Leslie and Randy Copain have been doing the same work I've been doing on the Avery and all these inside players. And they've been doing it for 30 years. And we're going to do a joint lecture. And we're going to release a lot of material that people really didn't know who was players in this game and what's been going on for the last 30 years.
This has been a great discussion, and it's just the beginning. And I think everyone listening and the panelists here, we're not just observing history in the making. This is part of making history. And this, I feel this time will be looked at back in history as like the pivotal moment where we woke up as a civilization. So thank you both. I'm Alan Steinfeld for New Reality. Go ahead, Grant. Yes. This
is the Super Bowl of all stories, and we're in the stadium watching the game. Enjoy it.
I think we're actually playing the game, and you guys are part of it. We're all part of it. Thanks, Stephen, Bassett, Grant Cameron, and everyone listening in, everyone who's going to be seeing this. And there's a whole new universe that just opened up to everyone, and this is a game changer. So we're going to hear from updates on Portal to Ascension and all the other avenues. Contact in the Desert at the end of May 2018 in Palm Springs, UFO Congress, the conferences that Paula Harris puts on, UFO Con. I think more and more of these types of events will start to take a main stage in the public. So thanks again. I'm Alan Steinfeld, New Realities. Look for my YouTube channel, youtube.com/New Realities. Thank you, Neil, for making this happen, Neil Gore. And I'm actually interviewing Neil Gore on BBS Radio tonight, BBS Radio 1 at 9 p.m. Pacific time. And again. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Grant.
Thank you, Alan.